Hello and welcome, I'm Jay.
And I'm Robbie.
And you're joining us for episode 25 of Generations Apart, the show where we chat about gaming and technology across the generations, sharing our perspectives on the past and our excitement for the future. On today's episode, we're talking about the revelations that came from the recent Microsoft versus the US Federal Trade Commission hearing in relation to Microsoft's $69 billion acquisition of Activision Blizzard. Before we get into all of that, though, Robbie, what has piqued your interest this week?
So this week it came across in an article that they're bringing out completely wireless TVs now. So you don't even have to plug in the TV at all. I saw this article. It was a friend of mine recommended it. But yeah, CES 2023. It somehow, there were so many things that were announced at CES. Somehow we missed this one, but a completely wireless TV. You just put it on the wall. And it has a hot swappable battery. Say that 5 times fast. And yeah, completely wireless TV. I thought it was a really cool
battery-powered TV. Well, yeah. I was interested until you said battery-powered, and of course, I guess there's no other way for it not to be battery-powered. Yeah. But I just thought, imagine you're in the middle of a really immersive TV show, binge watching your favourite Netflix series, and all of a sudden the little battery warning comes up, and you've got to run to the TV and hope that your other battery was charged because you forgot to put it on charge last time. That's really weird.
It's the future, though. You do that with like.
Is it?
You do that with.
Is it?
I think so. I think it looks weird now, but if you think about it, TVs have become so energy efficient over the last decade that batteries, the size of the TV, you could probably fit a sizable battery in. It could probably last quite a long time.
I would agree if the battery remains inside the television. If it's meant to be hot swappable, it's going to have to be of a suitable size that a civilian's going to be able to handle it, not drop it, because if you drop batteries, famously, they don't like that. Okay, that sounds great. How do you connect your devices if it's
funny
wireless?
So I was just
are you not expected to?
I had a reread of the article, and I actually couldn't see where you did that. So it even says, if you're already imagining your TV in the living room, simply minus its power plug and HDMI cables dangling out the back. Think again. Sorry. I read that completely wrong. But basically, it's saying that you don't have HDMIs in it either, but it doesn't say where you put the HDMIs. I think it is relying mostly on streaming services. You get Wi-Fi 6E.
Well, I was going to say, yeah, is it a smart TV, kind of the new Sky TV, is it Sky Glass or something like that, which has basically got your Sky box built into the TV. Is this one of those situations where you can use all the smart functionality within it, but you can't plug things into it? Or is it going to come with a range of weird sort of powered HDMI dongles that will have to wirelessly transmit your devices to the TV?
So the article didn't say. I suspect, though, it is the latter. You'll have a few dongles. And I've just found the part of the article where it does talk about battery life. 6 hours. 6 hours of battery life. How do you feel about that?
That's not enough for me. Not. I'll be honest, I can't remember the last time I spent 6 hours in front of the TV in one sitting. But even like family use, so, with the kids using it and then they go to bed, I want to pick up and watch something I want to watch, 6 hours will go pretty quickly in a day. So I suppose as long as you've got sufficient supply of batteries.
Oh, sorry, completely misread the article. It's a month, the battery, but 6 hours, based on 6 hours a day.
Good God, Robbie.
I know, God.
If we are professional podcasters before we started recording. Okay, well, actually, a month battery life based on 6 hours a day is pretty good, to be fair.
Yeah.
That's a chunky battery.
True.
It's got to be a serious battery to do that. But fair enough.
Well, if you look at the image, there is and for those who are watching on YouTube, you can see this as well. I've brought up the article online. It's called Displace TV. There is a kind of a cutout on the side of the TV. So if you think of how thin the TV is, I think that might be where the battery is. But yeah, I don't know. I'll include the link in the show notes, of course. You can make your own judgments. But I think this might be the future of TVs, completely wireless. It's all about the aesthetic in living rooms these days, where you don't see any wires. So there you go.
If you say so.
That is the future. It's supposed to ship later this year. It was announced in CES in January.
So I also bring you a glimpse into the future. Only you can buy this now. It feels like we haven't talked about ChatGPT on this podcast for a few weeks, and let's be fair, it's moving so quickly. So I'm bringing you a smart fitness gadget. It's effectively a sort of running kind of sports watch. It's from a company I've never heard of called Amazfit. Just an awful name, whoever came up with that, but whatever. I mean, it sounds cheap and cheerful, and I think maybe they are, but they've just brought out something called the Amazfit Cheetah Pro. And the Amazfit Cheetah Pro, it sells for just shy of £300. You get 10 pence change for your money. And it's a ChatGPT or AI-powered running watch. So it's got an AI coach which will provide you with training plans and then adapt your training plans on the move, on the fly, as you're completing runs and flexing it based on your performance. Otherwise, it contains all the sort of things you'd expect a running watch to. So it's using usual directional stuff. You've got your GPS, your route navigation. The AI-powered coach is called Zep Coach. I think it's all kind of like fed into the app. I don't know. Will it sort of displace the Garmin's of this world and even your Apple Watch? Probably not. But I thought it was interesting because it's likely to, I guess, pave the way for other firms to have to get in on the same kind of act. So, will Garmin now bring AI-powered coaching to their devices? Will Apple bring AI-powered coaching to the Apple Watch? One thing that's actually sorely missing from the Apple Watch as a standalone fitness device, if you use their native apps, is any kind of workout planning. So maybe they bring something AI-enabled, maybe Siri-powered, that will enable you to create flexible coaching plans. But I thought it was interesting. I used to use some technology, a website, which I now cannot remember the name of, which is very frustrating, that did, or at least reported to do something similar. So you would update your runs would go into this app. It would look at what it had told you to do that week versus what you'd achieved, and then it would sort of plan your next week for you. I guess this is using a similar type of concept. It looks fine. You can see from the pictures, if you're watching on YouTube, as Robbie is kind of scrubbing through the website, that I don't think it's quite as impressive as looking as some of its competitors. But at just under £300 for the Pro, there's another range of cheaper watches. It's not a bad price.
Yeah.
You'd pay more than that, I think, for the top end Garmin. So
definitely.
Maybe there's something in it.
I like the look of this one. I've always been a fan of spherical bases for watches. I know the Apple Watch has gone for square as their design, but there's something about a circle interface for your smartwatch that just is visually appealing. It reminds you of like a classic watch. It's got that kind of classic watch look about it, which I really like.
And I think a lot of the fitness watches have retained that. I don't think that Garmin and Co have moved to the Apple square look and feel. Yeah. And I'm like you, I thought square was a bit odd, although now I couldn't imagine anything different on my wrist. If you just scroll back to that one image you were just on, and apologies to podcast listeners who aren't watching on YouTube, the other thing that I see on there, and this is a nostalgic memory for me, it makes, because of the number of kind of gadgets and that almost like energy bar that's on that that particular dashboard, all I can think of is GoldenEye on the N64.
Yeah.
Because the pause screen was always Bond's watch, wasn't it? And it had all the widgets and the gadgets, and it looked a bit like it. So. And now I'm also aware, well, they used to do one of the Android watches, you could actually download a Bond watch face. This is going back years ago.
You could still do it. I had it on the Samsung watch.
I'm sure you can. Yeah, I'm sure you can. But not a new thing, I guess, is what I'm saying. But
I have to say, when I first loaded the page, I read that as an Amazon company, Amazfit, Amazon Fit. I thought that's what it was originally. I
wonder whether they're going for that in an attempt to try and, I guess, cheese off Amazon's brand and notoriety, because Amazon don't have an equivalent, do they? So perhaps they want to get bought by Amazon. They're look, hey, we're basically already called Amazon.
Practically the same.
Just buy us. Yeah. So anyway,
14-day battery life as well. Pretty good. Competes with a lot of
I think
sports specialist watches rather than smart watches.
That's often the complaint, isn't it? About Apple Watch versus the sort of traditional smart or fitness watches. The battery life is nowhere near comparable. What's interesting, though, I think a lot of the AI work is done off the device. So I think the AI work is done in the app, the companion app that goes with the watch. So
Okay.
I don't know whether that maybe impacts the value there at all. It's not done on the watch. It's all part of the product.
The only thing I would say is I'm not, well, so instead of the AI coaches, Apple seem to have lent a bit more into their Apple Fitness coaches, that they do have running coaches and classes and stuff that you can do whilst you're doing exercises through your watch and things like that. So I
think, don't mind.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily need an AI powered coach, but I would like, as no secret, you and I are training at the moment for a half marathon later this year. It would be nice to be able to just sort of bake into my watch without having to download additional products. I know there's other services that do this, but just in the Apple Fitness ecosystem, just to be able to say, this is my schedule, link it into my Apple Calendar, put these things in convenient places, give me all those reminders I'm used to. Just, it doesn't have to be super complicated. Just give me a simple template almost for a half marathon to work off. I don't think there's anything more sophisticated about the likes of Runkeeper or Strava, at least back in the day. You used to pick your endpoint, this is the day the event's taking place, and it would work backwards and give you a suggested training plan, and that's all I was really after. But
yeah,
anyway, I'm sure it'll come eventually. Apple are continuing to drive the health subject, aren't they? So it can't be far off. Perhaps they're just waiting for an Apple-like way to deliver it that they're comfortable with.
Just like the calculator app.
Just like the calculator app, yeah. You're not going to let that go, are you?
Never.
Right. Okay, let's get into the subject of today then. A couple of caveats to this before we start. So first of all, I want to acknowledge whose article I'm using for this, because it's a fantastic summary of the 5-day hearing. It was done by James Batchelor, the editor-in-chief at gamesindustry.biz. We'll put a direct link to the article in the notes, so that if you want to go and read it, I suggest you do. We're going to skim through this. We're not going to get into all the dirty details. And on that point, we're also not going to be getting into the specifics of the legal battle itself, or discussing or deciding who's right or wrong here. That's not for me or Robbie to do. Far more intelligent people than us can unpack that, and I'm sure there's loads of content out there. What we're more interested in, or fascinated by, are some of the, the pulling back of the curtain that's happened as a result of this. We've had kind of exposure to the way these big companies are running their operations in a way that we've never had before as a direct result of this hearing, and lots of emails, conversations have been made public, which really have been quite eye-opening in terms of some of the ways that the games industry operates. So we're neither in the Xbox or the PlayStation camp here. We are simply interested in kind of some of the key points that have come out of this. There's a huge amount of backstory to this. For those who don't know, Microsoft, the owners of the Xbox brand, looked to settle a deal for Activision Blizzard for $69 billion. I think it was announced probably 12 months ago or more at this point, and they are basically in legal hell across the globe as a number of different organisations are trying to block this. And of course, one of the big players in that, Sony and their PlayStation brand, believe they've got a lot to lose if Xbox are allowed to complete this takeover. So in this particular case, we're looking at the FTC, or the Federal Trade Commission in the US, and that's because of the US legal system. They've been able to share publicly way more information than we perhaps might get in other jurisdictions. And we thought we'd just unpack some of the interesting stories that have come out from that. There's Judge Corley is presiding over this, and will make a decision ultimately on where she comes down on Microsoft versus the FTC in this space. That hasn't been announced yet at the point at which we're recording this. It might be in the next few days. Nothing we can do about that, I'm afraid. But we're going to run through what was revealed over the 5 days. And I've picked out some of the things that I thought were interesting, not controversial. So as I say, we are focusing really heavily here on what was interesting, what was unearthed, some of the statements the company's made. We're not going to get into who's right, who's wrong, and some of the mudslinging, because that's just not our brand. So, Robbie, I'm going to pluck out on a day-by-day basis for this hearing, some of the things I thought were interesting. And I just want to get your take on it, really, and likewise, then anything you want to add to that.
Sure, yeah, bring it on. I haven't delved too far into it, so I'm excited to hear what's been going on. I've seen a few of the leaks here and there, from some of the documentation, but yeah, excited to see the whole lot.
I followed a lot of it on Twitter as it was happening, just, kind of some of the key messages coming out, and there were some really fascinating things that were being revealed. There was obviously a lot of back and forth between the two parties about the brand and who was right, who was wrong, which way this should go. But like I said, we're going to ignore those and focus on some of the more unusual things that surfaced. So the first one on day one was so this is Sarah Bond, who's vice president of Xbox, sort of testifying on their behalf, made a strange claim about Xbox cloud gaming service. So one of the angles here that the FTC are working is that it's not just Activision Blizzard and Call of Duty specifically, although a lot of attention went on Call of Duty as a iconic brand, but also and I think it was the EU or the British legal system that flagged the cloud gaming as being the real concern here, not the Call of Duty side of the deal, which I think surprised a few people. So in this particular claim, Bond said that the majority of Xbox cloud gaming players use it as a console feature rather than as a regular service, and they often use it to start playing a game while the actual full game downloads in the background, or just to try a game out to see if they like it, making the argument that it was more of a side feature rather than a full-blown service that anyone needs to be too concerned about.
Interesting.
So what's your take on Microsoft making that kind of claim about a service they've spent a significant amount of money on?
It's not what their marketing looks like, based on their marketing of the cloud gaming. It looks like that's a huge part of their offering and their business. It's a huge part of why people buy Xboxes, you would have thought. They even pile it in with the the subscription service where you can get a console and the subscription for X amount of money, and selling it alongside it.
Don't confuse Game Pass with xCloud.
Okay.
So Game Pass is the subscription package to the library of games. xCloud is the streaming service that sits as part of that bundle.
Yes.
But not every game in the Game Pass is on xCloud.
No.
So
of course.
I think their point is more the cloud streaming element, because that was bizarrely the focus, not so much Game Pass as a subscription model. But
it's a
I
core
agree.
part of the Game Pass, all right?
It's been a big push. I don't know that it gets a huge amount of attention from Microsoft. I don't think they sort of laud it in quite the way they do Game Pass. I mean, certainly if I think back to the Xbox showcase we watched and kind of discussed a month or two ago, Game Pass came up a huge number of times during that, but they didn't really mention xCloud specifically.
True.
In fact, I don't remember them mentioning it at all.
Yeah,
but I just thought it was interesting.
Maybe I was getting confused actually when we went through that, because I was thinking they were just the same, like it would be available on the cloud streaming service straight on day one when they were saying Game Pass.
xCloud doesn't have the same tie in terms of day one that Game Pass does.
Okay.
So there's still quite a lot of games on Game Pass that don't work on xCloud, even now. Because I don't think xCloud's officially out of beta yet. I could have that wrong.
Yeah, it's true. I do see the beta sign all over the place when you try it out.
So I think it's one of those where there's a fair number of games in there, and things like Halo, Master Chief, etc. in there. I think we did God of War. No, not God of War, Gears of War. Let's get the right exclusive, the right platform.
The right wall.
But yeah, I think we did Gears of War, through the xCloud. But certainly, if you went on today, it's not 100% Game Pass equals xCloud.
Interesting.
There's definitely a disconnect there.
Maybe it's because we talk about a lot more than I think. I thought it was bigger than that.
Yeah.
But actually, in retrospect, when you say that, I mean, it's still in beta. You're right. It's not all over their marketing material, even though I lumped it in the same camp as the pass, the Game Pass. So maybe you're right. Maybe it isn't as core part of their offering as I assumed it would be.
Worth noting that, of course, Microsoft are going to make that argument because the opposition are kind of suggesting the opposite. So they're going to downplay it a little bit, but it was quite interesting to see that their belief, at least publicly, is that xCloud is predominantly there as a kind of a feature rather than a service that people rely on or play on heavily.
Interesting.
So that was the first thing. The next thing that I thought was quite interesting and certainly got people talking on Twitter was the idea that perhaps Microsoft had just outed the next generation of consoles and when we should expect them. So there were some court documents that were reviewed by IGN in this particular instance that suggested the expecting started period for next generation of consoles will be 2028, which would put that at 8 years post-launch of the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X and S.
Wow.
And that estimate came up during discussions of Microsoft's proposed 10-year deal to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation, saying the terms of the guarantee meant that the series would continue onto the next gen of consoles.
Yeah.
And that Sony would therefore be guaranteed parity with Xbox.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts? Will we see next generation consoles before 2028? Does that sound about right to you?
I think that sounds about right, given how long the cycle was beforehand. I mean, when was the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4 released? I mean, that must have been a long time ago.
But I don't remember the exact dates. We'd have to. I mean, if you can do a bit of tapping on your keyboard there, and magically pull that up. But it's certainly more than 8, maybe 9 years ago.
Yeah, because they also do, when they say the next generation, that doesn't include things like the slim version or the pro version that comes out in that cycle as well, right?
So it would be PS4 to PS5, PS5 to PS6. So yeah, you're looking at, I guess, the time lapse between Xbox One and Xbox Series X, and then Xbox PS4 and PS5. So if we can work that out.
Well, so 2013, November 2013 was the PS4.
Okay.
So that's 7 years.
You're looking at 7 years then. That's interesting, because I think the previous generation went longer. I think Xbox 360 and PS3, I have a feeling, went longer than that, maybe even closer to 10.
Yeah.
But 7 years. So actually what we're saying here then, that they're estimating that 8 years for the next generation. Now, we did lose the first year or two, arguably, for a lot of people who wanted next-gen consoles.
Yep.
Supply issues, pandemic, etc. So that may have elongated the cycle. I think 8 years feels like a stretch. When you think about how fast this technology is moving, and now increasingly they're having to keep up with PC, can they afford to wait 8 years to revise their hardware? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, I personally would like that, because it means I haven't got to spend loads of money on new consoles for quite a while. But I don't know. Are we going to see? Can we do another iterative jump? I think we talked about this offline the other day. You know, is there going to be a PS 5.5 or an Xbox Series X.5? You know, are we going to see
Pro?
that?
That's the ones.
Well, that's the Pro, isn't it? Yeah, we're going to see that, because the Pro models in the last generation took HD to 4K gaming.
Yeah.
But otherwise didn't do much. What's the next step? We've already said that the PS5 reports to be 8K compatible, but no one's got 8K TVs. So what's going to be the 0.5 jump? What's the thing that they can put in it that makes you go, I need that, because my games are going to do what differently?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
You might be right. The one thing I'd say, though, is, I mean, you rightly pointed out that it does 8K gaming, but no one's got 8K TVs. So I think the hardware is going to be is going to last a lot longer than the software requires of it. I think 8K gaming might be possible in, say, 4 to 5 years, once the games and there's, you know, more people have got 8K TVs. So I think maybe they've done that to the hardware. It was obviously way more powerful than it needed to be on release, and that was to extend the lifespan of it. But that was always the same with the other consoles released. So Xbox One and PS4, they were very powerful when they first released, and they weren't taking advantage of the full capabilities with the games and things like that. So I think 7-8 years is 7-8 years is about right. And it's not always about competing with the top spec PCs that come out. It's going to be, can you still play games? Will developers still make games for it? I mean, developers are still making games for.
I was going to say that's
PS4 now still.
You're absolutely right. So there are still a number of games that are coming to PS4 and Xbox One. Obviously, you know, you get the best version of them on the latest consoles, and Xbox do that smart delivery system where if you buy on one, you get it on both, which is really beneficial to the player. And because, of course, the last generation of consoles, we really moved away from, or we started to move away from, radical shifts between console generations to more iterative. It's more hardware driven.
Yeah.
They're becoming increasingly aligned with PCs. Yeah. So I don't know. It'll be really interesting to see what they do next. Obviously, Nintendo are even further behind, because they're still, their console's still technically the previous generation. although again that was a point that was argued. I don't think I called it out here specifically, but there was an argument at one point that Nintendo Switch couldn't be considered current gen. It was last gen.
Yeah.
And the counter argument from the Xbox team was, if you go into a video game store today, the 3 consoles that are for sale are the Series X, the PS5, and the Switch.
Yep.
So it is current gen from a sales perspective.
100%.
But it's sizably older now than the other two. So
and yet developers
really
are still making games for them. I think that's the point, isn't it? That it's less about the hardware and whether it's capable, and more about, yes, you might not have the greatest experience in it in 8 years' time, but developers are still going to make games for it, so people can still continue to play these consoles. And I think that's more important, I think, than the hhardware capabilities, because developers will make it work regardless.
Interestingly, and this is slightly aside from this, but we touched on we talked about Nintendo Switch upgrades before. There was a leak in the last week. Someone on, I think it was a Nintendo dev kit, had spotted that a hardware option in the kind of, I think in like the testing solution was highlighting something called, I think it was either N2 or something to that effect, and the code that was used for it was similar to when the Switch was unannounced and unnamed, only it was minus the 2. So there was this kind of like rumor that actually maybe now Nintendo are starting to share with developers the hardware specs for a future generation upgrade. So we might be getting a new Switch at some point soon. But anyway,
it's long overdue. But I suppose in the life cycle, I mean, when was the Switch?
Well, you say that. I mean, oh god, that goes even further back. Was that 2013?
Does that go further back? No, it doesn't.
No, 2017. 2017?
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose that makes sense because it was
6 years then.
That on par with the last. I thought that was. Yeah, because it was announced at. Oh, I get confused. 2017. I'll trust you. So how old's that now? That's already
6 years.
6 years old.
Yeah, which if it's following the same 8-year life cycle, I think the challenge is they've done it halfway through the Xbox and PlayStation one, so they're not. It's hard to compare them because I
think they're trying to stay out of the way of that competition, aren't they? They very much see themselves as not involved in that direct war. We do our own thing. We do the Nintendo thing.
Yeah.
We could go way off track here. Maybe this is for a separate debate, but I think Nintendo have made their job quite difficult for themselves by having some of the like kind of ultimate versions of their biggest games on their current console. You look at Mario Kart; they've made that an impossible package to beat now, with so many tracks, so many characters. Smash Brothers is the same; it's the ultimate version. Unless you just port them to your new system, in which case it's not the most inspiring roadmap for your games, then how do you beat the ultimate versions of anything? Anyway. Right, back to the subject at hand. So the only other thing I wanted to call out on day one then was a court filing that was spotted by The Verge. So ahead of the hearing, Microsoft continued to position themselves as the underdog of the console space. So the lawyers wrote, Xbox has lost the console wars and its rivals are positioned to continue to dominate, including by leveraging exclusive content. And Xbox has consistently ranked third in consoles behind PlayStation and Nintendo. So basically Microsoft putting their hands up and going, yeah, no, Xbox is third place. We have lost the console wars, as if this was ever a real thing anyway.
Yeah.
And not something made up. What's your thoughts on that?
That is a old self-deprecating claim.
I mean, sales-wise, they're not wrong. They have sold less Xbox Ones than PS4 and Nintendo Switch. They've sold less Xbox Series X's than PS5s and Nintendo Switch. So they're not wrong from a pure sales perspective.
Yeah. Services-wise, though, I'd have thought Game Pass is more popular than PS Now. I mean, given that they've outsold the consoles, perhaps not, but it certainly seems to be advertised a hell of a lot more than PS Now, and I don't know what the Switch equivalent is.
It's not even called PS Now, is it? It got rolled into PS Plus.
PS Plus, sorry, PS Plus.
One of the 3 tiered options.
That's
it's an interesting statement, isn't it? I think they're factually correct. I think they have lost the console war for the last 2 generations, but this also assumes that means they've now lost forever. And this idea that they are positioned behind their rivals and they'll continue to be dominated by them. Therefore, it doesn't matter. Let us spend $68 billion on Activision Blizzard. is kind of the argument they're making. Do you think, with or without the purchase of Activision Blizzard, that on the next gen cycle, Xbox could swing it? Does buying Call of Duty get you there? Or do you think actually they probably would still remain third behind those other two?
Well, you'd have thought it'd only get them there if it was exclusive, because you're still going to be able to get those games on the other consoles otherwise. I'm not sure. Well, that wouldn't help the console wars, but they'll get revenue from Activision in the game sales, right?
Well, this is it, isn't it? So this is the other point. So that one of the big arguments here is this idea that Microsoft will pull it from PlayStation and therefore make it exclusive. But as I think I've got it in day 2 or 3, I'll come to it in a minute with more detail, you'd be denying yourself some significant revenue if you took it away from that player base. We'll I'll pause that. We'll come back to it.
Well, that's the whole reason this is going on, right? Because that's the anti-competition. The main point is that they're worried about it becoming an exclusive. But that would be the only way that they would win the console wars, because otherwise buying Activision doesn't have any impact on the consoles. It's just a separate revenue stream that's independent of the consoles.
And they've got track record for that with Minecraft. So Minecraft remains on all consoles, although they've never released a PS5 version of Minecraft, which they claim, and it's in these notes, is because PlayStation wouldn't share details ahead of time of the hardware in order for them to be able to do that, which of course they're not going to, are they? Because if Minecraft's fiddling with the hardware, then Microsoft has got eyes all over Sony's brand new console. So interesting back and forth. And that's also an argument there that PlayStation users would potentially suffer in the future if Xbox owned Call of Duty, because if PlayStation were refusing, as they said they would, to share details of their next generation console, then it puts Xbox and the developers at Activision Blizzard on the back foot in terms of creating that software version for that other console. So day 2 rolled around. This is Friday, June 23rd, and Phil Spencer is on the witness stand. So he's the Xbox gaming boss. And one of the things that he has been saying throughout this is that they don't want to take Call of Duty off PlayStation. They absolutely want to continue to publish it there. They would even do a deal to suggest as much for a period of time that was agreeable to both parties. I think 10 years was suggested. And Phil Spencer said to the judge that he would swear under oath that Xbox will continue releasing Call of Duty on PlayStation. What do you make of that statement?
Well, that's some commitment. I mean, if you're willing to say that, I mean, you're not messing around if you're in the court saying that. So clearly he means it. And like you said, it would be a massive revenue stream that would be cutting off from Xbox if they did make it exclusive. And I think I don't know if it's the same for this generation. I think they might be making a profit on the consoles, but it was always, the consoles weren't the profit maker. It was always the games and the services around it. So I don't think winning the console war is really a priority for them, I would have thought, because it's more about the services and doubling down on their current users than anything. Obviously, more users would help, but the consoles themselves, I don't think are the main selling point. So I could see why they don't want to make it exclusive just for the sales of the Xbox console to go up, when there's far more revenue opportunity with just making it available to all consoles.
So interestingly, he also said that the Xbox gaming team runs as a standalone profit and loss business inside the wider company and is expected to be profitable rather than losing money over time. And he said, in fact, their expectation was for better results than being third behind Sony and Nintendo, which is part of the reason why they've gone for this acquisition, which is to help try and compete and help their organisation to compete.
Yeah.
The only thing that was notable it was all Phil Spencer on day 2, was that the FTC made some missteps in cross-examining Spencer, such as asking why Microsoft couldn't use the $68.7 billion for the Activision Blizzard acquisition on the type of exclusivity deals that Sony makes, which led Spencer to explain to the FTC's lawyers how the financials related to acquisitions actually worked, which is quite embarrassing, isn't it? It's a bit of a shame. We then had a weekend, and over that period, there was the article is calling the internal documents intermission. So as the industry waited for the hearings to resume, more information came to light via the internal documents, including emails from and to top Xbox management that were submitted as evidence. Now, one of these is really interesting, just from a gaming perspective. So one of the biggest revelations was the list of more than 100 companies that Microsoft were considering acquiring. And according to images that were shared, Xbox was looking at, as just a few of those 100, Sega,
Yeah.
Bungie, which of course ended up being acquired by Sony.
Sony, yeah.
CD Projekt Red, makers of Witcher and Cyberpunk. From Software, IO Interactive, Gearbox Software, Housemarque, before Sony bought it, Larian Studios, Remedy, 505 Games, and Devolver Digital, amongst many, many more. I mean, I would have thought if you had 100 companies on that list, that's probably all or most of the game developers that are worth talking about. But I think some of the big ones, and Sega was strongly rumoured when they were going on their shopping spree of a couple of years ago. So interesting to almost confirm that was true.
Yeah.
Bungie's a weird one because they allowed Bungie, or they sold Bungie? No, they allowed Bungie to become independent.
Yeah.
Years ago, because they bought Bungie when Bungie made Halo.
Wasn't Bungie one of the Halo developers, right?
So they made Halo. They bought them and made them a Microsoft studio, and then I think after they made Destiny, they then released them into the wild to do their own thing, and then Sony bought them. It's really interesting.
It's such a messy space, isn't it, with the two of them, Microsoft and Sony.
They also, as part of these emails detailing the pitch to acquire Sega, they also revealed how much they'd been paid for Hellblade developer Ninja Theory, which I think was $117 million.
Mm-hmm.
So,
wow.
Yeah, they spent some change when they went on their developer buying spree. But I think this year's Xbox Game Showcase was the first time we've seen the fruits of that start to come to the fore.
Yeah.
So it's exciting times if you're an Xbox gamer. There was other stuff that was revealed in those documents. I'm not going to go into it in too much detail.
That's again. The leak that I saw was the 100 developers and publishers that they were looking to purchase.
Yeah.
Some really big names in there. Really big names.
Then we move on to day 3. So this is where the attention turns to Sony Interactive Entertainment's CEO, Jim Ryan, and he'd done a pre-recorded deposition. Quite a bit in this one that I've picked out, actually. So the first one, according to Kotaku, was that Ryan had suggested Microsoft games are more popular in the US than in other territories because the majority, I quote, involve an element of shooting and online multiplayer.
Interesting.
That's an awkward one, isn't it? Ooh, don't know what to make of that somewhat controversial comment.
Yeah, that's a way to stereotype an entire country.
Exactly, yeah, I thought that. So I'm sure that went down really well. He also acknowledged that Microsoft had honoured an existing deal with PlayStation for exclusivity around Ghostwire Tokyo and Deathloop, and he said he fundamentally had no quarrel with Redfall being made exclusive. Of course, that flopped anyway. They're not great for Microsoft. And then he mentioned Starfield. He said, I don't like it, but I don't view it as anti-competitive.
Right.
So interesting that Starfield, which one of the things that was revealed in all of these documents was that PlayStation, prior to the acquisition of Bethesda, were trying to negotiate exclusivity for PlayStation.
Wow. Okay.
For Starfield. So
that would have been huge. That would have been a really big deal.
They also confirmed that Activision Blizzard's current obligation to release Call of Duty on PlayStation expires at the end of next year. So you can imagine that if this deal goes south because of PlayStation's interference, Activision Blizzard might choose not to play nice with Sony next year.
Because they blocked their acquisition.
I mean, could be detrimental to their company because, of course, they're losing out millions of sales.
Yeah.
But it'll be really interesting to see what happens if this deal collapses, because I think if it does collapse, it costs Microsoft billions anyway. A fair chunk of that $69 billion they have to pay, and they will lose.
I wonder if they could do something equally as spiteful to the PlayStation, in that they would release it on the PlayStation, but maybe not as many features or exclusive features of the game would be on Xbox.
So that did come up. I don't think I highlighted that somewhere specifically, but that does come up in the case as well, where they suggest that Microsoft could well put out a feature poor or a substandard version on PlayStation.
Yeah.
Which, of course, when Xbox went, why would we do that? Like, that's not going to help us as an organization.
Yeah.
Nor will it help the developers. But yeah, that was an argument that Sony had made.
Interesting.
Jim Ryan also believes cloud gaming will become a meaningful component of how gamers access games between 2025 and 2035. So
that's
interesting.
Quite a range.
It is a weird 10-year period to choose. But interestingly, he's making the point or the comment here that cloud gaming might not be the big thing right now.
Yeah.
He thinks in 2 years momentum's going to change, and then there'll be a 10-year period where that growth is exponential. So, what do you think? Are we not quite there yet in terms of the technology to make cloud gaming what it needs to be?
Yeah.
Do you think in a couple of years' time we will be? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd 100% agree with that. I know we did an episode fairly early on about game streaming and the different services that are out there. I think my experience with them all is that they're really not quite there, at least for the more popular and competitive games where you need that kind of fast reaction time. So as things like internet connections get more stable and quicker over time, there's the servers to support them with better hardware as well over time. I think, once it's at a point where it's indistinguishable from having a console in front of you in the room, then I think it'll just explode as well. At that point, it's a no-brainer. What would you need a console for when you can pay a subscription for some service and then get as many games as you want?
And that perhaps is where the Google Stadia concept becomes a reality. Perhaps was Google Stadia too far ahead of its time?
Yeah, the hardware wasn't there to back it up.
He also said, just to kind of close out the streaming piece, he said PlayStation Now, as it was, had a subscriber base of 3 million people before being folded into the revamped PlayStation Plus, which sounds impressive, although he says it's not a large audience in the context of their business, and they have 100 million plus players, so I suppose it's a very small percent.
That's a small amount. You're talking 3% of your player base.
Also, elsewhere during the hearings, according to IGN, Robin Lee, who's the economist from Harvard, testified that Call of Duty is a unicorn. And by that, he means a product that can't be easily replaced by other content. So if Xbox made it exclusive to its own ecosystem, PlayStation would struggle to create something similar, especially on an annual basis. Microsoft called on another economist, Elizabeth Bailey, who disagreed and said Lee's definitions are too narrow, unaligned with market realities. So is Call of Duty an irreplaceable franchise?
Unicorn. Yeah.
Is it a unicorn?
I would actually agree with that. I think it's one of these things. It's a bit like FIFA. People just, well, it used to be the case. People buy the Call of Duty that comes out that year, the next Call of Duty. They would just get it even if they don't know anything about it. It's just habit at that point. They've got such a reputation for the next version of their Call of Duty games that I think people would buy it regardless. So I do agree, to build up that reputation over time, to build that audience would be very difficult to replicate. So I'd agree with that.
So I'm going to skip one of the bullets and come back to it in a second. So to that point, on day 4, there was a document that was revealed as part of the case that 1 million PlayStation users only play Call of Duty. and an estimated that the series accounted for $800 million in Sony's 2021 US revenues and about $1.5 billion globally. It also suggested this year's Call of Duty is the last in PlayStation's exclusive marketing contract with Activision. Because at the moment, if you see an advert for Call of Duty, it always ends PlayStation.
Oh, really?
Even though it's on both, even though it's on both consoles, they've got that exclusivity deal. They get things early, DLC, stuff like that. So I thought it was really interesting. And to your point, there are games that have kind of transcended the gaming space and become things that someone you might consider to be a non-gamer, if there's such a term. I hate that term. But would play. So I had a friend who literally had a 360 and every Call of Duty every year, but played nothing else.
Yeah.
There are people, similarly to your point, FIFA's a great example, that only buy the latest FIFA. They play them to death, but it's the only game they play.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose on that basis, yes, if you take that brand and you make it exclusive and those people have no choice but to migrate to your hardware, that could be seen as a negative for PlayStation. But 1 million users amongst the 100 plus they claim to have.
I don't know. I think that's maybe underestimated, because I think the 1 million users that only play Call of Duty, it'll be, maybe, 5 or 6 million that only play Call of Duty and they only play FIFA. I know a lot of people like that. And small amounts of games, and that could be, and I think it is underestimated, that market of people, because I think you're right. That is a big reason why a lot of people buy consoles and wouldn't even entertain gaming without that. Yeah.
Oh, and so interestingly, that document was one of many that were never supposed to be, or at least the details were perhaps never supposed to be made available. So there were some redaction issues, we'll call them. as some of the documents that were filed basically allowed the redacted words to be read. Now, what basically happened there is, from what we understand, is that whoever went through these documents and redacted them had used a Sharpie and then scanned them. And the scan had revealed the text underneath the Sharpie and made it all perfectly legible. So as a result, we know a lot more than we probably should have done from some of those documents. They were up for a certain period of time in the public domain and then brought down, but they were up for so long that cat was out of the bag. It was too late.
It takes is seconds. Yeah.
So as a result, we know that The Last of Us Part 2 cost $220 million to develop, with close to 200 staff, while Horizon Forbidden West cost $212 million and had around 300 staff. So a couple of interesting numbers there and costs to some of these games we take for granted. So you can understand why they market them so heavily and why they need to sell so well.
Yeah. When
you're shipping that kind of cash, that takes a lot of game sales at $50, $60 a go to recoup. Yeah. There was lots of other stuff revealed in that process, in addition to the 100+ companies that Microsoft considered acquiring prior to that deal. Xbox apparently prepared a bid to buy Square Enix in 2019. That was really interesting. So Square
what do they
Enix,
make? Sorry.
Final Fantasy is one of their biggest ones. Kingdom Hearts is another one, amongst other things, but probably Final Fantasy is what they're most well known for. This was dubbed Project Phoenix, presumably because the Phoenix Down is a popular, I think it's an item in Final Fantasy that revives fallen players. And the initiative was apparently designed to give Xbox a bigger audience in Japan and have more titles that would launch day and date on Game Pass. Now, interestingly, right now, Final Fantasy is a PlayStation exclusive. So the latest Final Fantasy 16 is only playable on PlayStation. And PlayStation paid a chunk of money to secure that. And of course, they've also got the Final Fantasy remakes, which are only available on PlayStation. So maybe if Microsoft had bought them, things would be a little different in terms of where you'd be playing Final Fantasy 16 right now.
Interesting.
And then the last thing that I picked up from the document side was, in fact, are we on the documents or are we on day 4 now? Day 4 now, sorry. Was that Bobby Kotick, I think he's one of the seniors at Activision Blizzard, was asked whether he sees a reason why Xbox or Microsoft might want to make Call of Duty exclusive. And he said no. To our point earlier, it would alienate over 100 million monthly active players. We'd have a revolt if we were to remove that game from one platform.
Yeah.
And that's a fair point. Well, I was going to say, if Microsoft are as far behind in the console wars as they say they are, you don't spend $69 billion on a company to then take away access to the platform revenue where it sells best. You know, you're not going to convert 100 million players to your console. Not that quickly, at least. Yeah. So 100 million active players is what they're quoting the PlayStation has on Call of Duty. So you can understand why...
It's quite a market.
That is quite an audience. But again, Microsoft can sell the game to the PlayStation audience at $70 as it's sold now. Give it away on Game Pass. Where would you be more interested in getting your Call of Duty if you could have it free?
True.
Effectively. Or for the price of $70, you could have 6 months plus of Xbox Game Pass. So 2 games a year pays for your full access to Game Pass. You get Call of Duty and everything else that Game Pass has to offer. Makes for a compelling argument, but you'd still be able to buy it on Sony.
Yeah, that is a good point.
Then on to day 5, we're kind of getting towards the end now. This was the closing hearing, so this was kind of like a few little bits came out, but mainly both parties kind of making their final arguments. So the FTC once again emphasised that pulling Call of Duty from PlayStation would result in a share shift, air quotes, towards Xbox. And according to The Verge, this was about concern over harm to consumers, not harm to Sony. The Commission also drew attention to the potential impact on competition in the cloud gaming space, suggesting a Microsoft-owned Activision would lead to a world where instead of having content available, it's all just Game Pass, and maybe Sony has PlayStation Plus, and these two suck up all the content, and that's it. So, suggesting that the purchase of one developer, albeit a very big developer, would lead to a complete monopoly between Xbox and PlayStation on the cloud streaming space before it's even got started. Your thoughts?
That's interesting they say that, because there's a bit of a monopoly now already without that. I'd say Xbox Game Cloud the game streaming is far more popular than the PlayStation one. So maybe they are worried about, an acquisition like this would leapfrog them even more, to the point where PlayStation wouldn't even be able to catch up. Yeah, interesting argument. I can see where they're coming from. I don't know. What do you think?
I find it a weird. I mean, I think it's interesting. I don't think Microsoft or Sony are big enough to suck up the cloud gaming space completely.
Yeah.
Because let's be honest, Google and Amazon are certainly going to be lingering. There are other big corporates. Meta, for example, might fancy a piece of that pie in the future. There's going to be others
Nvidia's already doing one as well.
Nvidia, yeah. There's going to be others who are going to want a piece of that. I don't think that Activision. I don't think bringing the Call of Duty library and of course the other Activision Blizzard products into that market is going to completely transform cloud gaming.
Yeah,
it's a massive purchase. Don't get me wrong, and Call of Duty will be an attractive prospect. But anyone who's hardcore about Call of Duty is not doing it on cloud.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of those games that I think you need the instant reaction times.
Competitive, it's ping times and competitive. Gameplay is not going to support cloud gaming. It's more casual at the moment. That might change.
Well, maybe that plays into their argument of 2025 to 2035, which would
speculating though, aren't they? I mean, anything can happen in that period.
That is hard. I mean, hard to predict that. Of course.
Last thing that I wanted to mention is that one of the final arguments or final conversations that happened was that Sony have been kind of making comparisons to the Bethesda deal that Microsoft did X number of years ago now.
Yeah.
Where they have now made things like Starfield. They made the new Indiana Jones exclusive. They've made a number of Bethesda titles exclusive. And the argument basically was being made that Microsoft have got a track record. They're going to buy Activision Blizzard and they can do the same thing again. So the judge asked the FTC, focusing on Call of Duty and AAA games, to explain which Bethesda game would be comparable to Call of Duty. To which the FTC said Elder Scrolls. Now, Microsoft lawyer later corrected the FTC by explaining there were two Elder Scroll games, the Elder Scrolls Online, which is already available on PlayStation, and the upcoming Elder Scrolls 6, which he said is projected for release in 2026. He stressed that the latter is single-player as opposed to Call of Duty, which is multiplayer and multi-platform. He also referred to the game as Elder Scrolls 16, but it's a safe bet Bethesda won't be releasing 11 Skyrim sequels in the next 3.5 years. So I just thought that was interesting. I'd call that out. But
did we know that already? That Elder Scrolls 6 was coming out?
We knew it was in production. No dates had been put on it to date, other than it was been confirmed. But it's it's the next game that apparently they're moving on to post Starfield, which of course is the big focus at the moment. So well,
that's cool. At least getting a year in the diary for that.
If you're into that space, it's not.
An Elder Scrolls Skyrim kind of.
No, not particularly. It's not really my game. I've tried them in the past. Just a bit too open world, too vast for me, and I'm not really into medieval kind of fantasy as much as I am the more futuristic stuff. I'd prefer a Mass Effect or a Cyberpunk to. That's why, as much as I'd like to get into The Witcher, I find the fantasy environment a bit more challenging, just for me.
Yeah.
I know I appreciate it's brilliant for those who love that space, but I'm just more interested in that kind of future tech, cyberpunk kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like I said, Judge Corley was then kind of basically getting all the facts, bringing all the thinking together, and will release her ruling under seal, whatever that means, at a later date. It hasn't happened as we record this right now. It's the date. It's the 10th
Monday the 10th.
July.
Yeah.
So it hasn't been revealed yet. Knowing our luck, it will probably be done in the next couple of days, and then it will
we've got a habit of that, don't we?
It'll completely date this podcast. But if it doesn't happen in the next week, or even if it does, we'll touch on it when that announcement comes out and reflect on whatever it is she decides, because it's going to have a big impact. But this deal is far from done. There's a long way for it to go yet. So
yeah.
We'll wait and see. Any thoughts from you, Robbie, before we bring this episode to a close?
No, really interesting though. Exciting to get a glimpse at the business side of a lot of these game development stuff, getting sight on stuff that we'd never see before, because of these leaks and these discussions in court. Just a fascinating insight into that industry. And I'm always shocked at how messy it can be with all the selling and buying of these companies, and how I never really thought of, if you own a game studio, that's also producing games for other companies and other company consoles, you need access to that hardware before the game's released to make sure it works. Now that's something that's got to be tricky to handle for most games that are cross-console and that have alliances with either Microsoft or Sony or even the Switch for Nintendo. So
there was a comment in here. I'm just going to try and find it again because it was interesting as well, which was about the it was like the split between the revenue split that they will do when they strike some of these exclusivity deals. And it's something like 70-30, I think, is the standard, but Microsoft said they have in the past gone as far as an 80-20 for the right games that going to bring audiences to their platform.
Wow.
And that's that kind of, I guess, the developing versus the publishing deal. And I don't know if you're aware, but like there's quite a scene on the internet for dev kits for older machines, because once they make their way out to companies, they do inevitably find their way to the internet.
Yeah.
And these dev kits, they tend not to be branded or boxed neatly. They're kind of ugly, basic boxes that just contain all the hardware components so the developers can put their builds on it and test it.
Yeah.
But if you have a little look around the internet, there's some examples of these dev kits getting leaked or making their way into the hands of the public. It's
I think
quite interesting.
I think it was just before Xbox One X was released. I remember seeing a dev kit of that floating around on YouTube, and a few people were trying it out, and it had like additional hardware ports and I don't know, additional stats and stuff on the or kind of meters and things on the controller and on the console itself. And yeah, they were really kind of clever looking at those. I think they were even more powerful as well than the actual release console in the end, having like more RAM or something and more storage, lots more storage, things like that.
What's probably another episode conversation is Nintendo are famous for this with their old consoles. If you pop the bottom off an NES, there are ports that were never used for anything. That were kind of like future-proofing the console for expansion. Back in the day, of course, things like the Mega Drive were then bolted onto the Sega CD, and these ports were all used to interface these pieces of hardware together before we had the simplicity of USB-C and things like that.
Yeah.
But a lot of the old ones, especially I think the NES, the SNES, and the GameCube, all have additional ports, most of which were never used. GameCube did use theirs for the Game Boy Advance player.
Yeah.
That you could bolt on the bottom. Bloody hard to find those things are, at least with the companion disc. Very expensive. Still haven't got one. But yeah, so maybe that's another episode that we're going off track. So let's wrap this one up on time for a change, I think, broadly speaking.
Yeah.
So that's it for this episode. Thank you for hanging out with us as always. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're over on YouTube, or subscribe on all good podcast services so you don't miss an episode. You can now also join us live as we stream a variety of games. No longer on Twitch, we've now moved to YouTube. We stream old and new games. We are live most Sundays with the odd additional bonus in the week as well, where we can fit them in. So hit that notification bell so you don't miss a stream or an episode. We'll see you next time.